So you're dead. Not ideal, we know, but you probably saw it coming. It happens to everybody after all. Hopefully later rather than sooner. Since the dawn of civilization, humans have been wrestling with the infinitely deep concepts of immortality, resurrection, reincarnation, and the afterlife. What happens to our soul, our mind, our consciousness after we die? Philosophy, religion, even certain scientific fields have been trying to find a definitive answer to those questions. Thus far, the solution to such conundrums is essentially a matter of faith in certain beliefs, theories, and hypotheses. But there is another aspect to the post-death realm that can be more accurately measured and described by science, one that is often neglected but not less fascinating. What happens to your mortal body, to your literal flesh and blood, after you die? First of all, we need to define exactly what death is, what needs to happen or not happen in order for a medical professional to declare that you are indeed dead. For that, we can look at the definition provided in 1981 by the US President's Commission for the Study of Ethical Problems in Medicine and Biomedical and Behavioral Research. A mouthful. According to that commission, an individual is dead when he or she has sustained either irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions or irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem. Now, the Medical Code of Practice, adopted by UK healthcare professionals, features a more detailed definition. Death should be regarded as the irreversible loss of the capacity for consciousness, combined with irreversible loss of the capacity to breathe, the irreversible cessation of brainstem function, whether induced by intracranial events or the result of extracranial phenomenon such as hypoxia, will produce this clinical state, and therefore irreversible cessation of the integrative function of the brainstem equates with the death of the individual and allows the medical practitioner to diagnose death. But both definitions agree on two common aspects of being dead: irreversible loss of the capacity to breathe and irreversible cessation of brainstem function. Now, some medical professionals do not agree fully with this definition, such as neurologist Alan Schumann. He argued that many cases of patients who presented with apparently irreversible brain function cessation ended up surviving. But for the purpose of our analysis today, let's stick with the most widely accepted definition: irreversible cessation of breathing and brainstem function, which don't happen spontaneously. They are, of course, the consequences of an underlying cause. And what is the most common cause of death worldwide? Well, according to figures published by the WHO, the constant chart topper is ischemic heart disease, responsible for some 13% of deaths every year. As of researching this episode, January 18th, 2025, the disease has already killed some 470,000 individuals since New Year's Day. The medical term describes the interruption of blood supply to the heart caused by a buildup of fatty substances in the coronary arteries. Hence, this disease is also known as coronary heart disease. The most extreme consequence of this buildup is sudden cardiac arrest, or SCD. This is defined by Science Direct as an abrupt and unexpected cessation of cardiac activity, leading to complete hemodynamic collapse and resulting in the death of the victim. Now, for obvious reasons, it is impossible to ascertain exactly what you might experience at the point of death. We can get some hints from the accounts of patients who have gone through near-death experiences, or NDEs. In other words, people who have been brought back right from the brink. Typically, those who have experienced NDEs report feeling an overwhelming serenity or peacefulness. This feeling is often accompanied by visions of a bright light, sometimes shining at the end of a dark tunnel. Others have reported the feeling of floating out of their body before being forcefully pulled back down. These individuals may even recall encountering otherworldly entities or their loved ones. Medical science does not have a definitive explanation on the cause of these experiences. A decrease in blood flow to the retinas may account for the tunnel imagery, while a disruption of the temporal parietal region in our brains may lead to a loss of the sense of embodiment and thus the outer body experiences. Another hypothesis is that a brain on the brink of death may release the chemical dimethyltryptamine, which may cause hallucinations. Now, we realize that this topic requires a great deal of speculation, even delving into metaphysical explanations. So, we'll keep ourselves grounded instead to what happens to your physical self, to your body, once death occurs. The first obvious and immediate consequence is that your heart stops beating. Next, your brain ceases to function. One after the other, all vital organs shut down, terminating all bodily systems and functions regulated by them. This early stage is defined as somatic death or systemic death. Should a medical professional attend to your body, they may record signs such as insensibility, loss of voluntary movement, lack of breathing, the cessation of blood flow, and the general shutdown of nervous system activity. Then, all the muscles across your body will immediately relax. Unfortunately, this relaxation will also include your bladder and sphincter, meaning you will likely relieve yourself. The general relaxation is just a temporary effect, however. In the early hours after death, rigor mortis will start to set in. This is the stiffening or locking into place of our body caused by the accumulation of calcium inside muscle cells. By analyzing rigor mortis, a forensic pathologist may be able to estimate the rough time of your death. For example, if your mortal coil feels stiff but still warm, you probably shuffled it some 3 to 8 hours earlier. If you are stiff but cold, you may have deceased up to 36 hours earlier. If your body is already cold but no longer stiff, more than 36 hours have probably already elapsed. This timeline and the overall onset of rigor mortis can be influenced by external factors such as the outside temperature, physical conditions of the environment, or activity at the time of death. In the first hours after cessation of life, your body will undergo 2 more processes. The first is livor mortis, or lividity of the body, a bluish-purplish discoloration of the skin caused by the now stagnant blood being pulled down by gravity. Blood will pool in the lower parts of the body in contact with the ground, while smaller vessels will break down. This will cause the appearance of tiny spots of blood underneath the skin, known as petechial hemorrhages, or Tardot spots. Now, the second process is algor mortis, the cooling down of the body temperature. A healthy human being generally presents an average temperature of 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This temperature is maintained by blood flow and drops by about 1.5 Celsius per hour after death occurs. As algor mortis sets in, a film will gradually cover your eyes, giving them the cloudy appearance that accompanies eternal slumber. And now for the more gruesome part, decomposition. This stage encompasses 2 processes, autolysis and putrefaction. Autolysis can be defined as, quote, the deconstruction of cells or tissues by their own enzymes. In other words, this is the process by which the human body digests itself. When our heart stops beating and the blood stops flowing, our cells are starved of the oxygen which helps them to break down sugar to create energy and to remove carbon dioxide. This is an acidic molecule, so when it builds up, the pH within our cells starts to drop and their membranes are ruptured. Some of these membranes are the ones surrounding the lysosomes, which are basically the stomachs of our cells. When the membrane breaks down, the enzymes contained within the lysosomes are unleashed, digesting the cells from the inside out. Our DNA and RNA molecules are digested and cut down into their essential components, such as sugars and phosphates. As our body starts digesting itself, it goes through the second process, that of putrefaction. This is the main cause for the degradation of bodily tissues and is caused by millions upon millions of ravenous bacteria. When still alive, these tiny monsters are kept at bay by our immune system. But once we are, well, gone, they're just completely unopposed. 4 days after death, bacteria will first feast on a buffet of sugars and other molecules kindly laid out by the process of autolysis. And then they will multiply and proceed to attack all remaining tissues, moving from the gut to the spleen, liver, heart, and brain. While bacteria work their way through the body, they will release gases such as ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and methane, which will bloat the abdomen and release a pervasive stench in the surrounding area. Other visible signs of putrefaction include a green discoloration around the stomach area and blistering of the skin. Hair and nails will also start falling off if that hasn't happened to you already. Some 10 to 20 days after death, your mortal vessel will enter the second stage of putrefaction, known as black putrefaction. This is when exposed patches of skin will grow black and fluids will start leaking out. And then there's the third stage, between 20 and 50 days after, and that's butyric fermentation. During this period, almost all remaining flesh and soft tissues are gradually removed by the action of insects, other scavenging organisms, and bacteria. The anaerobic kind, in particular, will bring about the formation of butyric acid, which ferments the remains, creating a pungent, rather cheesy smell. However unpleasant, this reek will attract more maggots. At the same time, if your body is lying outdoors, the parts in contact with the ground will begin to mold. The last phase, dry decay, can last up to a year after death. The decomposition will progress very slowly now, as almost all fluids are absent. The putrefaction process, it doesn't always follow these stages, as it can be influenced by environmental conditions. For example, if you happen to draw your last breath while in water or in a warm and humid environment, your body will undergo saponification, or adipocere formation. Over the span of 3 weeks to 3 months, heavy fatty tissues such as cheeks, chins, bellies, or buttocks will be affected by hydrolysis and hydrogenation. Hydrolysis refers to the breaking down of chemical bonds caused by molecules of water, while hydrogenation is the binding of hydrogen atoms to another compound. As a visible result of these processes, your fatty tissues will gradually become adipocere, a soft, greasy, waxy yellow substance. Over time, adipocere will harden and become white, thus preserving your likeness in a recognizable shape, which is weird. On the other hand, the backdrop of your demise might be a dry, arid, well-ventilated setting. In that case, you will go through mummification, i.e. a progressive desiccation of the tissues. The overall body will shrink in size, the skin will turn brown and appear stretched tightly over protruding bones. As hinted at earlier, in all cases, if your body is exposed and abandoned after death, it will attract the ravenous hunger of scavengers of all kinds, corpse fauna. The first patrons showing up to the big feast are the common houseflies and blowflies laying the eggs. As they hatch, the larvae or maggots will feed on the fluids released from the body and later also on solid tissue. The first wave of pioneer flies will be followed by the aptly named flesh flies, or sarcophagidae, who will release further maggots. The abundance of larvae will prove irresistible to yet more species, such as flies and parasitic wasps. The former will simply feast on the maggots, and the latter will feast on your decaying flesh. And the latter will also lay their own eggs inside those maggots that are eating your body. I mean, you clicked on a video, what happens after you die? What did you expect here? As the body enters the dry decay phase, it's time for another set of critters to take center stage, those specialized in consuming harder bits of flesh and cleaning up the skeleton. These include cheese flies, coffin flies, but also hide beetles and ham beetles. Next, it will be moths that will be attracted to your body, like, well, moths to a flame. More precisely, their larvae are known to feed on mammalian hair. Depending on the location of your demise, your remains may attract larger animals, birds like magpies or vultures, or even other mammals. Even if you die at home, your once loving but now desperately hungry pets may feel the temptation to take a nibble. And now that all your flesh has either decomposed or been eaten away, all that is left of you will be a skeleton. Over a span of years or decades, it'll also decay in a process called diagenesis. The two main components of your bones are a protein, collagen, and a mineral, hydroxyapatite. Collagen will degrade first, leaving the mineral remains prone to cracking and flaking. The combined effects of changes in temperature and humidity, erosion, or the action of scavengers will eventually break down your bones into dust. This process can be halted or slowed down if the surrounding soil is extremely dry and rich in minerals which can bond with the hydroxyapatite. As a result, your skeleton might be preserved as a beautiful fossil to the delight of future archaeologists. Now, the scenarios described so far imply that your body may remain undiscovered, forlorn, abandoned until it just crumbles into dust. That's not the case in most occurrences, especially if you have succumbed to ischemic heart disease. Chances are that you've passed away in a hospital or in the presence of loved ones. Within a few hours, your demise will be recorded on a death certificate by a pronouncer, i.e. a medically trained individual capable of determining that death has occurred. Then, a certifier, typically a medical doctor, will document the cause of death by recording the three components of mechanism, immediate cause, and underlying cause of death. By recording the three components of mechanism, immediate cause, and underlying cause of death. In some cases, the cause of death will be documented by a medical examiner or a coroner. Such cases include violent or suspicious deaths, of course. However, a medical examiner or a coroner will also be consulted even if you succumb to natural causes while outside a hospital or hospice while not under the regular care of a physician. After completing their examination, the coroner may determine that your death warrants an investigation, such as an autopsy or a toxicological report. But if there's nothing untoward around your final act, your body will be taken good care of by a funeral director. They might embalm your body first by removing all the blood and gases, and then by injecting a disinfecting fluid such as carbolic acid, also known as phenol. This is great at destroying the cell walls of bacteria, fungi, and even molds, thus preventing soft tissue from immediate putrefaction. Next, the funeral directors will remove your organs and embalm them with a tissue fixative agent such as formaldehyde. The organs will be reinserted into your body and further treated with a preserving powder like sodium pentachlorophenate. Finally, you'll be laid down into a coffin which will be sealed and then buried. The required depth of graves varies across different countries, but a minimum of 2 feet or 61 centimeters is usually recommended. Within the sealed coffin, and even after extensive embalming treatment, your body will undergo decomposition, albeit at a much slower rate. It may take up to 10 years before your bones are left as the sole occupants of your last abode. Funeral practices, however, vary widely depending on culture or personal preferences. Bodies might be cremated, buried with or without a coffin, or disposed of at sea. Commercial space agencies may even offer to scatter one's ashes beyond Earth's orbit. These rites are certainly fascinating, and a detailed overview might require an episode of its own. As usual, let us know in the comments if you'd like to explore further. But what we'd like to focus on now is another fascinating question. Does life still go on inside your body after death, and if so, how? In the late 2010s and early 2020s, researchers at Alabama State University, Max Planck Institute, KU Leuven, and other institutions observed a fascinating phenomenon known as Thanatotranscriptome. This term combines the Greek word for death, thanatos, with transcriptome. The latter is defined by the journal Nature as, quote, the full-range messenger RNA or mRNA molecules expressed by an organism. In extremely simplistic terms, what happens here is that certain cellular activities are resurrected immediately after death, hence the unofficial name of zombie gene expression. Paradoxically, while all bodily tissues have wound down after death, some cells enter into a frenzied state of activity, almost as if refusing to accept that the final curtain has been drawn. As stated by forensic scientist Gal Nasyavan at Alabama State University, cells don't want to die. Survival is programmed into their molecular makeup. To better explain this, we have to look at what happens at the beginning of life. In their very early stages, after your conception, you were just an embryo, a mass of undifferentiated stem cells. And before you grew a cardiovascular system or had access to a placenta, your cells lived in a low-oxygen or hypoxic environment. Even so, those stem cells thrived, proliferated, activated developmental genes, and transcribed DNA. Later, little embryo you would burrow into the lining of your mother's uterus and would thus receive more oxygen. Once the stem cells have access to more oxygen, they start to differentiate into specialized cells, forming tissues and organs. Abundance of oxygen triggers a second consequence, the deactivation of those genes responsible for the stem cells' early frenzied activity. These genes, however, are not permanently shut down, but rather they go dormant. Fast-forwarding the clock of life, we then get to the moment of your death. As blood flow is interrupted, your body's cells are starved of oxygen. Suddenly, they revert back to the same hypoxic environment which marked the start of the embryonic stage. In a stubborn show of defiance, some cells refuse to acknowledge that they should be dead. These dormant genes will be reactivated by the lack of oxygen and then release mRNA copies into the cytoplasm, i.e. the watery interior of a cell. To clarify, mRNA is a single-stranded copy of a gene's DNA sequence. The release of these mRNA copies after death is the equivalent of broadcasting a final desperate distress call. Researchers at Alabama University have measured the activity of these mRNA transcriptions in mice, zebrafish, as well as human liver and prostate tissue sourced from autopsies. Their colleagues at KU Leuven have also analyzed post-mortem gene expression in human blood. Their findings suggest that the first distress calls would be released as early as half an hour after death, with others peaking 48 hours later. One of the first key resurrected genes is the hypoxia-inducible factor, or HIF. This gene will immediately respond to the waning oxygen levels by activating further genes originally involved in early embryonic development. Genes such as XIAP, which inhibits the proteins which regulate cellular death. In other words, hypoxia resurrects the dormant HIF, and HIF will then wake up its buddies in a last harrowing fight to keep the cells alive. Besides it being a fascinating finding, the study of Thanatotranscriptome has some important practical applications. For example, forensic scientists may use zombie gene expression as a tool to calculate the post-mortem interval, i.e. the span of time between death and the start of a criminal investigation. Oncologists and transplant surgeons are also very interested in zombie genes. 2. Some of the genes reactivated after death may cause the proliferation of cancer cells. By performing transplants before those genes are resurrected, they may be able to protect transplant recipients from developing cancer in the future. And thus concludes our overview of what happens to your body after death. We do hope you don't take it personally, nor that you found it enjoyable, because that would be concerning. What is truly striking is that even after no signs of heartbeat nor brain function are present in what appears to be a completely inanimate shell, a complex system of living beings still stir, still thrive, still desperately cling to existence. Science has long known about the actions of bacteria and larger scavenging species, but only recently has been researching the properties of the so-called zombie gene expression. In an almost poetic way, this brings our lives to a full circle by linking the early sparks of our embryonic self with the last vestiges of our unsuppressible urge to live. Thank you for watching.